The storm arrived like a monster from the mountains. In the winter of 1879, the Montana frontier was a place where only the strongest survived. The rivers froze solid, the trails disappeared under endless snow, and a person could vanish into the wilderness without anyone ever knowing what happened. But on one forgotten trail between the mountains, 4 desperate souls were still fighting to survive. A woman, and 3 children. Their footsteps were becoming slower with every passing minute. Clara Dawson could no longer feel her hands. Her boots were soaked, her coat was torn, and her youngest son was becoming too weak to walk. She held him tightly against her chest, using the last of her strength to protect him from the freezing wind. "Stay awake, Tommy," she whispered. The little boy opened his tired eyes. "Mother, are we almost there?" Clara looked ahead at the endless white wilderness. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise him that everything would be okay. But a mother knows when hope is becoming harder to hold. "We're going to make it," she whispered. Behind her, her older children Henry and Lily walked silently through the snow. Henry was only 12 years old, but he walked like a man because he knew his mother needed him to be strong. Lily held onto his arm. "Henry, I'm scared." Henry looked at his sister and forced a brave smile. "Don't be, Mama said we'll be okay." But even Henry was starting to wonder if they would survive the night. 3 days earlier, they had lost everything. Their small farm was taken from them, after a group of wealthy landowners forced them away. Clara had begged for time, but nobody cared about a widow with 3 children. They had taken her home, they had taken her animals, they had taken the only place her children had ever known. So Clara did the only thing she could do. She walked into the frozen wilderness, searching for a new beginning. But now, with the sun disappearing behind the mountains, she realized something terrifying. They might not survive long enough to find one. At that same moment, a lone cowboy was riding through the storm. His name was Jack Morgan. People in nearby towns knew his name. Some called him a hero, others called him dangerous, because Jack Morgan was not the kind of man who ran from trouble. He was the kind of man trouble avoided. He wore a dark leather coat, a weathered cowboy hat, and carried the scars of a life filled with battles. But behind his cold expression was a man who had spent years trying to forget his own painful past. Jack had chosen loneliness, no family, no friends, no promises, just his ranch, his horse, and the silence of the mountains, until that night. As Jack guided his horse through the snow, something caught his attention. Footprints, small footprints. He stopped immediately. "Children, out here, in this storm?" Jack turned his horse toward the tracks. The deeper he went into the wilderness, the more worried he became. Then he saw them, a mother standing alone in the snow, a child wrapped tightly against her chest, 2 children beside her, shaking from the cold. Jack jumped off his horse. The woman looked at him with fear in her eyes. "Please," Clara said quietly. "We don't want any trouble." Jack looked at the children, then he looked at the storm around them. "You're not trouble," he said. His voice became softer. "You're in danger." Clara lowered her eyes. "We were trying to reach the next town." Jack looked toward the mountains. "No one reaches that town tonight." The words frightened her because she knew he was right. Jack walked back to his wooden wagon. Inside were supplies, blankets, and enough space for travelers. He pulled open the wagon door. The warm lantern light escaped into the darkness. Then he looked at the freezing family, and said the words Clara would never forget. "All 4 of you, get in." For a moment Clara didn't move. She couldn't understand why a stranger would risk himself for people he had never met. "Why?" she asked. Jack looked at the children. "Because I know what it feels like when nobody comes." Those words surprised Clara. There was pain hidden behind his eyes. A pain he never talked about. Slowly, the children climbed into the wagon. Clara followed. For the first time in days, they felt warmth. But Jack didn't know that this rescue would bring danger straight to his doorstep, because someone had followed their trail. And that someone was the reason Clara had lost everything. Several miles away, inside a large wooden mansion, a powerful ranch owner named William Carter received news. The woman was found. One of his men said William stood near the fireplace. "Where?" "With a cowboy named Jack Morgan." The room became silent. Even William knew that name, Jack Morgan, the man who had defeated every outlaw who challenged him, the man who never surrendered. William smiled. "Then we don't chase the woman." He grabbed his coat. "We go after the cowboy." The next morning, Jack's ranch woke up to the sound of approaching horses. Not one, not 2, a whole group. Jack stepped outside and saw armed riders surrounding his property. Clara looked through the window and immediately recognized them. Her face turned pale. They found us. Jack looked at her. Who are they? Before she could answer, William Carter rode forward. Jack Morgan. Jack stepped onto the porch. What do you want? William smiled. You're protecting something that doesn't belong to you. Jack looked back at the family inside, then he looked at the armed men. She belongs nowhere except somewhere safe. William laughed. You always did have a weakness for lost causes. Jack slowly walked down the steps. No. He stared directly at him. Your weakness was believing men like you would stop when they hurt enough people. The riders moved closer. The wind became silent. The entire valley felt frozen. Then William gave one order. Take them. And that was the moment everything changed. Because the lonely cowboy who wanted nothing to do with the world was about to fight for a family that had become his reason to stand again. The silence of the frozen valley was broken by the sound of horses charging through the snow. William Carter's men surrounded Jack Morgan's ranch from every direction. Their rifles were raised, their faces were cold, and they believed the lonely cowboy standing in front of them was just one man against an army. But they didn't know something important. Jack Morgan had spent years surviving alone, and a man who has already lost everything is not easy to scare. Inside the cabin, Clara held her children close. She could hear the shouting outside, the angry voices, and the footsteps of armed men moving closer. Henry looked at his mother. Are they here because of us? Clara didn't answer immediately because the truth hurt. Yes, she whispered. The boy looked down. I'm sorry, Mama. Clara quickly held his face. No, Henry. Never apologize for needing help. Outside, Jack stood on the frozen ground, facing William Carter. You rode all this way through a storm, Jack said. You must really want this family. William smiled. You have no idea what you've stepped into, Morgan. Jack's eyes narrowed. I know exactly what I stepped into. He looked toward the cabin. A man trying to protect people who have nobody else. William laughed. You always were a fool. Jack slowly removed his gloves. No, he looked at the men surrounding him. I was a fool when I thought people like you could be reasoned with. The first rider moved forward. Get out of the way, Morgan. Jack didn't move. The rider reached for his weapon, and that was the mistake. In one quick movement, Jack grabbed the man's arm and pulled him from the horse. The rider hit the snow hard, and before the others could react, Jack was already moving. The fight exploded across the ranch. Snow flew into the air as boots slammed against the frozen ground. One man rushed toward Jack with a heavy punch, but Jack blocked it and pushed him away. Another tried to attack from behind, but Jack turned just in time and knocked the weapon from his hand. You children watched from the window, amazed. The quiet cowboy who had saved them was not just a rancher. He was a fighter, a survivor, a man who had spent years learning how to stand when everyone else wanted him to fall. But William Carter was not afraid. He stepped off his horse and walked closer. You really think you can stop me? Jack looked at him. I don't need to stop you forever. He raised his fists. Just long enough. William attacked. The two men collided in the snow. Unlike the others, William was not just a rich landowner. He had hired fighters for years, and he knew how to hurt people. The battle was brutal. Jack took a hit and fell to one knee. Inside the cabin, Clara covered the children's eyes. But Jack remembered something. He remembered the three children hiding behind the window. He remembered the little boy asking if they were in trouble, and he remembered his own childhood, when nobody came to help him. Jack slowly stood back up. William looked surprised. Still fighting? Jack wiped the snow from his face. For them. The next moment, Jack pushed forward with everything he had. The fight moved across the ranch, through the snow-covered yard, until William finally fell. The other men stopped, because they realized something. Their leader had lost. Jack stood there breathing heavily. Leave. Nobody moved. Jack looked at them. Now, slowly, one by one, the riders turned their horses around and disappeared into the snowy mountains. For the first time in years, Jack's ranch became quiet again. But the silence felt different. It was no longer lonely. That evening, Clara sat beside the fireplace while the children ate a warm meal. The children laughed for the first time in days. Jack stood near the doorway, watching them. Clara noticed. You're smiling. Jack looked away. I'm not. She smiled. Yes, you are. For years, Jack believed he had lost his chance at having a family. He believed some wounds never healed, but now, sitting in that small cabin, surrounded by people who needed him, he realized something. Sometimes life doesn't give you back what you lost. Sometimes it gives you something you never expected. A new beginning, Weeks passed, the snow slowly melted, the children helped around the ranch, and Jack taught Henry how to ride a horse. Lily filled the quiet cabin with laughter, and little Tommy followed Jack everywhere, calling him the cowboy who saved them. Clara watched the change in Jack. The man who once lived behind walls was finally letting someone in. One morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, Jack stood outside the ranch and looked across the land. The same place where he once stood alone was now filled with voices, laughter, and hope. Clara walked beside him. "You know," she said, "when you found us in that storm, you thought you were saving us." Jack looked at her. "But," she smiled, "but maybe we were the ones who saved you." Jack looked toward the cabin where the children were laughing. And for the first time in many years, he believed it. The winter that almost took 4 lives